This is the unsolved murders of Nicole Glass and Melissa Mason. Two young ladies home alone on a Thursday night. Their plans for the night fell through, so it looks like Plan B is a quiet evening at home. Or at least that is what it should have been. The two roommates passed the time texting with friends. But life turns on a dime. And just like that, they go silent. The next morning, both of the roommates are unaccounted for. They failed to be where they're supposed to be a concern. Friend decides to check on them and finds the unthinkable. Both women are dead. The two ladies were killed in their own homes. There are very few clues and even fewer suspects. Police wondered, did either of them have a past with known enemies or associates with a reason to hurt or kill them? Did the killer target the two roommates? Or was this a random homicidal act? Could it be that Lee, one of the young ladies, was the real target? Was Melissa just in the wrong place at the wrong time? Or was Nicole the one who was collateral damage? It was midday on a Friday, December 3, 2010. A young woman, who has never been named publicly, was trying to reach her friend Nicole Glass, age 27. The unnamed friend was trying to reach Nicole for several hours. Nicole failed to show up at the gym that morning, which was highly unusual. Nicole's phone was going straight to voicemail. On that morning, the friend decided to head over Nikki's home with her roommate, Melissa Mason. Also, at age 27, this house was located at 4247 East Cambridge Avenue in East Phoenix, Arizona. This was a modest single-level home on a cul-de-sac in a residential neighborhood. Nikki purchased the home in 2006. When the friend arrived around 12:20 p.m., there was no response to her knocks at the door. Now, although both women's cars were parked at home, so she suspected that they would be home, at least one of them. So when she tried the door, it was locked, but then the friend didn't give up. She walked around to the back of the house and started peeking in through the windows, and through one window, she saw the body of a woman lying on the floor of the living room area of the home. So she called 911. On the 911 call, she says, quote, "I just came over to my friend's house, and she's not answering the door. And I went around to the back, and I have just seen someone lying there," end quote. When investigators arrived, they noted that the house was locked, and there was no sign of forced entry into the home once they forcibly gained entry. Thanks to some help from the fire department, they found the bodies of not one but two women lying on the floor. This was, in fact, the two roommates that lived at the house, Nicole Glass, the homeowner, and her roommate, Melissa Mason. Sadly, both were dead. There was obvious and visible trauma to both bodies. One of Nicole's dogs, a bulldog, had also been beaten and required medical treatment. Thankfully, the dog survived. If you look at pictures of these two, they almost could pass as sisters. They were the same age. They could pass for sisters or cousins. Now the autopsy's captain confirmed what people who viewed Nicole and Melissa's bodies must have surmised. They both were killed by way of ligature strangulation. This information was released in a statement by the Maricopa County Medical Examiner's Office. The ligature was a cord-like object. It was not stated whether police believed that the ligature or the cord-like object came from inside the home. But it is reported that the implement was not found at the crime scene. And even more tragic, the medical examiner discovered something significant while conducting the autopsies. Melissa Mason was 8 weeks pregnant when she was killed, so this is even sadder, but fittingly so, the case was declared a triple homicide. Yeah, when you first hear that, maybe it leans to some motive. Certainly, it raises suspicions, that's for sure. I don't see in any reports where there's any sign of a break-in. There was no sign of forced entry into the home, and in regards to Melissa's mom, Sandra, she received a phone call that, frankly, no one wants to get. She learned over the phone that her daughter, Melissa, was dead and, even worse, that her daughter was murdered and that no one knew why exactly when, or who committed the homicides. Now, in regards to the time of death, it's going to be very difficult to determine in this case. Of course, you always want to know the time of death to determine who had the means to commit the murders. But according to the family, the medical examiner was not able to pinpoint a time of death. All that the public has been told is that the two were believed to have died between this is sometime between 8 p.m. on December 2nd and 12:22 p.m. on December 3rd. Now the basis for this very loose timeline is this. It's reported that Melissa's boyfriend, Marcus, was at the house visiting Melissa on the night of the 2nd. According to him, both women were home and accounted alive when he left home around 8 p.m. Marquise is the last known in-person sighting of both of these young women. Detective Toby Myers, who was in charge of the investigation, initially said that both women sent text messages from their phones after Melissa's boyfriend left their home. Since there were only text messages and not phone calls, meaning no one heard their actual voices, Theodore Marquise to be the last person to see or talk to the girls, said the detective. However, at some point that evening, it may have been earlier. Nicole was at a Ross clothing store in Phoenix, so it must have been earlier. I'm guessing here, Captain, but there's no time frame for this event. As far as we know, the Phoenix PD has never reviewed the video surveillance footage from the store to see if it held any clues. Now, I want to put a little caveat on there. They may have reviewed this surveillance footage. They've just never spoken publicly about this event. And again, we know that this happened. Per the family and witnesses. However, we don't know when this event occurred that evening. I'm guessing because of the detectives and law enforcement statements in Phoenix that this would have been before the boyfriend left home. Or again. The boyfriend says he left home at 8 p.m. so this must have happened before then. And all that, what they're trying to do there is that we have this eyewitness saying, "Hey, I came over as there for a while when I left. They were both alive." Well, we gotta find out if they were alive before then. Now, we have this movement where Nicole was at a shopping center. Possibly she used her debit card to pay for something, and then we have another eyewitness so now we know that his story is lining up more with what he's telling law enforcement. According to Melissa's mother, Sandra Melissa also sent out some texts that evening, the last one going to her boyfriend's Marquise just after 10 p.m. Now, he says, when he called her back, it was after midnight, and her phone went straight to voicemail. According to what he told Phoenix police, I'm guessing law enforcement has both of their cell phones. They do, and that was a bit of a mystery for the public. And we'll get into that deeper as we go because I think that's a big part of this case and a big part of the mystery of who done it. So we have the boyfriend being the last known person to see the girls. Apparently, he told the police that Nicole was in the shower when he left, and it sounds like they had a bartending job scheduled for that night. But neither woman ever went to this bartending job, and that's it. A friend showed up at their house at 12:22 p.m. the next day. Both of our victims are already dead, and the killer or killers were long gone by that time. In this case, the Phoenix police have released almost no information about the crime scene, so little that even the families of both of the victims know next to nothing about the state of the crime scene and what evidence may have been found inside the home. And remember, our poor woman who discovered them, who has never been named, did not enter the home. So we don't have any statements from her either. She saw the body of one of her friends lying on the floor in the living room area and then called 911 when looking through the window of the back of the house. They're protecting the friend's identity because we don't want her to become a suspect. If we look at the front of this house, it looks like it's a single-car garage. I'm guessing the garage has access to the house. Maybe it's siding access to the house, and then you have the front door, but it looks like there's possibly a window on the front door. But also there's a front window. Now the Phoenix Police Department told family and friends of the victims that this was a very high-profile case. And they said that it would be best if very little information were released not just to the public but also the victims' inner circle of family and friends. And as we stated, they did confirm that there was no forced entry into the home. All of the doors and the windows were found to be closed and locked, and law enforcement stated that the killer must have locked the door on their way out of the house. This was not done with a key, but with the kind of door handle lock where you turn to engage the lock in the middle of the knob, and when you close the door behind you, and now you have locked the door on your way out of the house. There is some information about the crime scene that we do know, and it is as follows. Both Melissa and Nicole's cars were parked at the house. Melissa was found on the floor between the kitchen and the dining room area. And the reason why that's important for them to say, both of their cars were there, meaning that the individual that did this definitely knew both of them were home. If you're going to judge on suspicion of anybody being home based on vehicles spotted out front, then you see both vehicles. They must be home at this time? And if I was a killer and I was gonna target one of the individuals, I probably want to go in. It probably would not be the opportune time to try to kill one of them if both of them were there, and that's going to lead us down the path of was this plan or was this something that just was reactionary? Nicole was found on the floor of the living room. Other than that, no information was released, whether there was any sign of a struggle inside the home or whether the two women were restrained in any manner, or whether anything was missing from home. As the detectives have said, this is very interesting that they could not rule out robbery as a possible motive. But they went on to add to the vagueness of investigator statements here. They also said that they could not rule out any other type of common motive for the murders. But with death by strangulation with two individuals, it almost feels like it leans to more than one perpetrator. We do know that law enforcement collected a lot of evidence from the crime scene. But exactly what that means, specifically, it is unknown. Now several family members told me that one of the pieces of evidence was the cell phones. So both cell phones, the phone belonging to Nicole and then the phone belonging to Melissa, were found inside the home. But get this. The phones were found in a pot of dirty water in the kitchen sink. So presumably, the killer or killers wanted to destroy the phones to destroy evidence on those phones. And as we saw, police were still able to determine that the women had been texting that night. This is interesting because you have to wonder, did police gather that information about the women texting that night and who they were texting and when from the two victims' phones? Or was that information that they collected from other people? You have to wonder how successful they were by leaving them in water, soaking in water, presumably overnight, or whenever the murders went down again. It just leads in my mind to more than one perpetrator. If you control one victim, the other victim will possibly put up a fight or run to get help or something. Yeah, it just seems like a lot is going on, and there's a lot to control in this environment. And speaking of the environment, the neighbor said that the young women pretty much kept to themselves but always had a lot of cars. So a lot of people are coming and going from home all the time. Phoenix Police Department reported that they did not have any reports of illegal activity having taken place at home. It seems the neighbors were. They might have been a little touchy about all of the friends that the women had over from time to time. Often you will see this when younger people. We know both of our victims here, the captain said. You see this when you have younger people like our victims when they live in an older neighborhood. Sometimes you get neighbors watching one another and policing each other for reasons only because they may be bored now. Nicole had a series of roommates over the 4 years that she owned the home, so there were always people moving in and out of the house, and as we said, the home was on a cul-de-sac. But it looks like there was only one house across from them. Also situated in the cul-de-sac behind our victim's home, where the women died, was a brick wall around a small yard area separating their plot of land from a parking lot for an apartment building. So who knows how busy that apartment building parking lot would be at certain times. Let's get into a little background information here regarding these two ladies. The two 27-year-olds were close friends, as we said, roommates and colleagues. They lived together, off and on, since they met when they were both 23. Up until the time of their deaths, they both worked as bartenders and waitresses at a strip club in Phoenix called the Sweet Spot. Melissa still worked there at the time of her death. Until 2008, both women had worked at a gentleman's club called Pantera and overlapping there for about 3 years. The managing general partner of the club, Frank Van Susi, told Desert News that the two were good girls and smart. Nikki was 5 feet 4 inches tall. She was a workout junkie. She used the treadmill and weights at her gym regularly. Remember this kind of the first sign? When her friend at the gym says she did not show up for her normal workout that day, red flags go up. She goes over to check on her friend. When she worked as a bartender. As someone who used to bartend, she would be what I would call a brilliant/popular bartender. She knew how to play the bartending game, so her regular patrons would bar hot. They would follow her from bar to bar as she filled in for relief shifts or other bartenders. You know this is something your whole salary as a bartender is based on tips, and you'll see some brilliant bartenders who do this often. You can only work a couple of days a week at a bar because they have other bartenders. You traditionally work longer shifts, so you work just a couple of days. If you want to make good money in that career, you get to 2 different bars, or you move around, and you're always letting everybody know all of your regulars. Hey, tonight I'll be at this bar on Thursday. I'll be at that bar, and they tend to follow you around in that. If you're barring busy, you ain't making much money that night. So she was not only good at her job but smart enough to have that following now. She recently quit her job at the club and took classes at the University of Phoenix, where she was studying communications better than computer. The media also reported that she did not have a steady boyfriend. At the time of her death, Nicole's aunt described her to the Phoenix News-Times as, "She loved to tease. She was fun, happy-go-lucky. She just loved life and lived a life before. But it's also a little bit a part of the job. If you're a bartender or your server or even in the band that night, your job is to have to make sure everybody's having a good time. Maybe you become a little flirty. That's natural." Melissa was known as Baby to her friends. She was a recent graduate from Medical Institute, where she trained to become a dental hygienist. But she since decided to go into forensics. She also loved to travel, in fact, one time visiting a cousin as far away as Qatar. In the summer of 2010, she lived with her sister, Samantha, so this would be the summer before the young women were killed. Samantha is her younger sister. She was planning to move back to Tucson, where her family was from. In the summer of 2010, Melissa seemed great. She was acting totally normal, wasn't into anything shady, didn't disappear at random times, or received mysterious phone calls when they lived together. She was living a normal life in the summer before she was killed. But we would be remiss if we didn't point it out. Both women worked at a strip club many times with strip clubs, and there is drug use. In general, there's drug use by the patrons or by the staff. Now, Melissa moved back into Nicole's house in the fall, so she moved relatively not too long before these murders take place, and she recently discovered that she was pregnant. It's not known whether this was a planned event, but she told friends that she was pleased about the pregnancy, and she told everyone that the father was her boyfriend, Marquise Melvin, but was waiting for 3 more weeks until Christmas to surprise her mom, Sandra, with the good news. After she was killed, the positive pregnancy test was found in the home in a baggie with "Merry Christmas" written on the baggie with a Sharpie. But the boyfriend knew that she was pregnant. The boyfriend knew the sister knew, and, of course, her roommate knew, as it was a couple of friends. She's just keeping it for mom. Again, how successful were the killers in destroying those phones, or what information would have been on those phones? We don't have statements from detectives to tell us where they collected, knowing that there were text messages sent and received that night. They form the people that received them or that were communicating with Nikki and Melissa that night. Now, as we said in 2006, Nikki purchased the 3-bedroom, single-level home on East Cambridge Avenue where the women were living. She did this with some roommates, so immediately she's buying the home and then having roommates move in to help with the expense by paying her rent and taking advantage of, at the time, what were readily available mortgage loans that were around in the mid-2000s. It looks to us from our review of the financial documents that she borrowed about $300,000 to purchase this home. At some point, she got underwater with the house after a refinance. This home went into foreclosure. But in November, this is the point out that she's having some money issues leading up to the murders. November of 2010, just 1 month before they were killed, Nicole was able to come up with the money to save the house, and at the time of her death, it was actually under renovation. So she and Melissa were still living there while the house was being renovated. But it was empty. It was somewhat empty, and there's not a lot of furniture inside because the floors were being redone at this time, and the 2 young women were sleeping on couches while the work was being accomplished. Nicole and Melissa's families feel that Phoenix police have given them the runaround. The initial detective on the case, as we mentioned earlier, her name, Toby Mayer. She went out on maternity leave for 5 months after the murders. According to the families, no one worked the case until she returned in October of 2011. So, unfortunately, this is such a stupid thing to say. But unfortunately, the timing of the murders of the investigation is not great. The detective who will be working on the case is looking into it, and after 5 months, she has to go on maternity leave. This case was unsolved, it was relatively fresh, and the family says we did not see or hear of any work being done on our daughter's case. So after Toby Myers comes back in October of 2011, she moves on. The case was handed off from there to another detective and then to another detective. It really bounced around the department to different detectives for years. And apparently, there were a large number of homicides in the city in 2010, and the police force was just overwhelmed. The problem here with this case is it's not right away. When you look at the situation, you look at the victims. You look at Nicole, what she's doing with her life. You look at Melissa, and what she's doing with her life. You have one of them pregnant. So okay, that's a possible motive. Then you go, maybe burglary, and could be known. It could have been an unknown burglary. And the reason why is because you have both individuals that worked at a strip club. Both individuals worked as bartenders. Both of those occupations give you loose cash. That's true. You be coming home with cash, and most of the time, because you're working as a bartender, you don't have the time to deposit to your bank at night, so it's safer to come home.